Hey there, YouTube. This is my takeaway and review of the book Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Suzanne Cain. This book is amazingly written and combines psychology, sociology, and historical anecdotes in a way that makes somebody who is more shy and to themselves feel comfortable that you can still achieve greatness with these qualities. You don't have to be the gregarious, extremely talkative type to expel your creativity in the world. And Suzanne Cain, through her very dedicated research and methodology, really does a good job of conveying this. I will say certain studies and people are portrayed in a light that may be a little subjective and biased towards the introvert, but suffice it to say, it's a comfort read for anybody who is more on the introverted side and wants to know that it's not a bad quality. It's just that society has labeled it as such. A little bit about Suzanne Cain. She graduated from Harvard Law School, so she was in that very competitive environment and was probably inspired to write about what she noticed in terms of different personalities there. And she founded a company called The Quiet Revolution, which deals with letting the public know that it's not the worst thing in the world to be an introvert and quiet. And she works in the home, in schools, and in workplaces to try to destigmatize the label of introvert and quiet. I'll mention a little bit or a few facts that I took away from the book, which stuck with me. She starts off mentioning Rosa Parks, and surprisingly to me, how Rosa Parks was a person who conveyed silent fortitude, not somebody like Martin Luther King, who was an extremely compelling speaker who had a way with words to turn anybody's head in the room immediately towards him. No. She was dignified and she lived by her character. And this made her the perfect person to refuse to get up from her seat on that bus and start the movement, the boycott of the bus. So it was a good opening in the sense that it showed the power in the silent fortitude. In a similar way, later on, she goes on to mention Gandhi as well as being somebody who was also fearful of not only speech, but thieves, ghosts, and the dark. Somebody who is, in general, scared of a lot of what ifs. And I didn't know Gandhi was more of a quiet, introverted person. I knew spiritually he may have been very enlightened and calm, but I would never have guessed that such a leader in the Indian independence movement and proponent of rights for people around the world would be so quiet. But it is the case. He believed in satyagraha, firmness in truth. Firmness in truth. There's something so powerful about that. The truth inherently has a strength and validity towards it that no matter how loud you speak, can't be replaced. It's satisfying to know that you don't always have to keep, putting out this information. Sometimes living by your character and what you want to, preach is enough. And for Gandhi, he particularly had a extremely rough life when he went out to Britain to study law, and his parents ousted him from the caste system, preventing him from seeing his mother or father. But he stuck with it in his quiet but strong way, and eventually, as we know, was a pioneer in history and one of the most notable historical figures for independence and human rights. So, and also another anecdote about Gandhi that she mentioned was how he in a court case when he was in South Africa representing someone there, they told him to take off his turban. And do you know what he did? He didn't refuse. He didn't try to put up a fight against the judge. Something of deep cultural and personal significance to him, he put it down. He took it off. because he picks his battles wisely. It goes along with this introversion mystique that has a certain allure to it. You choose where to expend your energy. And someone like Gandhi is wise enough to choose where that place is with purpose and intention. So these are the people that, as introverts, we can look up to. Have them in our backgrounds whenever we're tempted to abandon that softer, sensitive side of ourselves. There are these amazing people who have done amazing things because of their softer, more sensitive side. Eleanor Roosevelt was someone also she talked a lot about, who was the first lady to have her own newspaper column and even signed off on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the UN, all relating to this more sensitive, introverted side to herself. And I would like to mention some of the psychology that really blew my mind in terms of the physiological aspects of introverts that is different from extroverts. I wouldn't have suspected introversion to be a quality that, maybe not in all cases, but in a lot of cases can be so embedded in our own brain. So she mentions the ARS, the ascending reticular activation system, which is a section of the brain stem leading up to the prefrontal cortex. And it controls the sensory input being put into the brain. And for introverts, apparently that, the ARS is not as large, so it's not able to block out as much sensory information. So that could be a big contributor to why a lot of introverts are more sensitive to noise and stimulation around them to the point where they can't concentrate. And related to that function of the ARS or ARAS is a study where lemon juice was put into the eyes of introverts and extroverts, and the introverts ultimately were the ones who had to sweat and blink more quickly. They reacted more quickly physiologically to the lemon juice, and the extroverts lasted longer. I think it was Eisnick who ran that study. It's a famous study now, and it shows how embedded not only into our disposition but into our actual body and into our psychology our aptitude towards being more gregarious or possibly more to yourself is. And isolation is not the enemy, which is what she highlights. It's about finding what you love and pushing yourself out of that comfort zone only when it's for things that you love. And it's okay to have those, as she calls it, restorative niches where you go into that reading or private zone to refill. I think I do want to mention also a little bit more about the psychology she talks about, which is the amygdala of introverts also being more sensitive and reactive. The amygdala is one of the oldest and primal parts of the brain, and for introverts it seems to be more sensitive to whatever sensory information is being put out there. And there's just so much interesting psychology she mentions, but I'll leave it at that for the psychology. And one more notable anecdote that I guess I'd like to say would be the whole notion of how, the dialogue has shifted from character to cult of personality, and goodness to gregariousness, or impressive character to impressionable. She kind of maps this shift out well through a political, even scientific and societal lens. You have presidential campaigns like John Quincy Adams versus Andrew Jackson all the way back in the 1820s, where Andrew Jackson is platforming on, I'm a fighter and he's a writer. He's the intellectual who will be more sensitive and not as reactive. I'm gonna punch back and be, put some force into the air. And that's where you see this energy of having to be vocal and put out, being a priority in the public. And you also have, as she talks about drugs being pushed in the pharmaceutical industry, like in 1955, Milton was quickly one of the most popular selling pharmaceuticals, which reduces social anxiety and allows you to be more unrestrained from your inhibitions. So it really shows how people feel this way. People feel this way and have felt this way, but it's not being talked about in the discourse, at least not directly. And, I love having deep and meaningful conversations myself, but I've always felt that I'm not one to have any fun or enjoyability in those high stimulating environments. So it was just a breath of fresh air to listen to so many interesting scientific stories related to this. And I really thought it was a great read. And I'll end off on one note that was also very, very interesting to me, that jobs that are typically associated with extroversion, as extroverts being extremely productive and good at, are not necessarily affiliated with higher performance. Let's take cold calling and sales. She mentions that a lot of cold callers are extroverts and not necessarily outperforming the more introverted ones or less gregarious, talkative types. She mentions how conscientiousness, hard work, and diligence, grit, is usually associated with introversion, and those traits will take you further than any extroverted trait can, even for a job that typically requires you the social skills and social stamina as a salesman would. Now, I'm taking this all with a grain of salt, because typically a salesman will be very extroverted and comfortable and even naturally inclinated to be around people. And I think her lens is focusing on a certain angle, but it does have truth to it, and I just wanted to share it with the world. So if anybody else is, more introverted or sensitive, and if you read this book or if you didn't read this book, I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of these ideas, and if you think some of these things should be more talked about in society as a whole, and if there should be more literature and research about it, because I know I'm interested in it. And thanks for listening to a 20-year-old ramble on about introversion. But that is it. Peace and love. I hope to get your thoughts.